All right, we will call this quarterly meeting of the Commission on Sentencing to order. And we can start, I guess, just by noting for the record, everyone who's in the room. So we have Attorney Marsico, Judge Marsico, Professor Mystic. I know Judge Daly is here. I think he just stepped out momentarily. Judge Bernstein, DA Sunday, all in the room. And then on the Zoom, I believe we have Professor Rago, Senator Langerholk, Representative Krajewski,
and Senator Street.
And Senator Street is on Zoom as well.
Senator Street's on Zoom right now. He's being promoted to panelist.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then Judge Tucker, I know, was on the Zoom, and I presume will be back with us shortly. So we will get moving with any public comment. Anyone to offer public comment? I don't see anybody. Is there anybody on the Zoom who would like to offer public comment? Nope. All right. Nope. Terrific. So we'll move on to the approval of the meeting minutes from the March 10th quarterly meeting. Is there a moving to approve the minute? Is there a motion to approve the minutes? All right. Judge Bernstein, is there a second? All right. Judge Daly, moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the March 10th, 2022 meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. All right. Moving on to executive, administrative, and financial.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. So a lot of action items, so we'll get right to it. Let me start with commission membership issues. We have several outstanding appointments. As you may recall, the commission was reorganized in 2019 with all appointments occurring on October 1st, and then reappointments, of course, were due October 1st of 2021. There are, I believe, 3 members that we have not received a reappointment, but the legislation dictates that members continue to serve until being replaced or reappointed. So Senator Langerholk, who was appointed by the Senate President Pro Tem, Representative Krajewski by the House Minority Leader, and Attorney Marsico by the President Pro Tem. Those 3 members are continuing to serve, but hopefully will have reappointments in the near future. We then have 2 ex officio members of the commission, the Secretary of Corrections and the Parole Board. So I wanted to provide an opportunity either for the DOC or the board to make any comments. So starting first with the DOC, if Secretary Little or any representative of the DOC wanted to make any comment. And we're not seeing any there. And then for the Parole Board, Chairman Johnson or any representative from the board. Any comments? Okay, great. Thank you. So moving on to administrative and financial, I provided in the materials the current organizational chart. We have a approved complement of 24 staff. We have recent hires. Tiffany Smith joined us as an education outreach specialist, so Ryan may talk about that a bit later. And Craig Brooks, I believe today is his first day, or yesterday. Oh, he's a veteran then.
Yesterday
was his first day. Yeah, thanks.
And it's actually Craig Briggs. Sorry, just wanted to correct that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks. And
You're welcome.
And Craig is a senior software engineer. So Christy will talk about that later. We do have a vacant position posted, data analyst. So again, anyone interested, we hire for those positions through Penn State. So it's been posted there. There's a link from our website. So we encourage anyone who's interested to view that. We also have several vacant positions that we'll talk about a bit more in a minute. Executive Policy Support Manager, that was Diane Shoup's position. SGS Web Support, that was Linda Bell's position, and Staff Support, that was Bob Probst's position. So those are vacant, but we are looking to reclassify those. So then moving on to management and oversight, there's a lot of activity here, and let me just sort of try to breeze through this. So on the staff reorganization, what we've talked to members about and what we hope to put in place effective July 1st of this year is reclassifying those 3 vacant positions. One is that the executive and policy support manager would be transitioned into a deputy director of administrative and outreach support. that would be a position appointed by the commission. The SDS Web support position would be transitioned to a policy support specialist, and the staff support position would be transitioned to an IT support specialist. So those are recommendations that staff is making, and it's part of a broader renewal of the memorandum of understanding with Penn State. As you know, we have a 5-year MOU with Penn State. And although we have another year left on it, there are transitions here at the commission, but also transitions at Penn State with new president, new department head, and other things like that, that it seemed like this was an appropriate time to renew the MOU and modify it. And one of the modifications that are required is for any kind of appointments by the commission to be also authorized in the MOU. And so by adding a second deputy director position, we are also in the MOU making the adjustment so that the commission is authorized to certainly make that appointment. They can always do that, but that Penn State would then be appointing that person as a faculty member at Penn State, a clinical faculty member. So what you have before you as the first action item is the renewal of the MOU with Penn State for the years 2022 through 2027. And there's two, I guess, background documents that are attached to that. The first is a description of our relationship between Penn State and the commission, why this MOU and this research partnership we have is so important. All of our operations are sort of done through Penn State. We have a really strong benefit in terms of financial support from Penn State, in terms of free space that we have and operating support. So we really want to continue to develop this relationship, and this MOU would extend it for another 5-year period. And as part of that would allow the commission to continue to report executive positions. So the executive director position, which is redefined in the document, and then 2 deputy directors, one that's sort of focused on the research side of the shop and the other that focuses more on the outreach side of the shop. So that is the recommendation. Built into the MOU is the continued support that we have through the research partnership, where we commit $225,000 a year to identifying faculty and staff and students to work with the commission on research projects. We saw one of the benefits of that today in the HR 111 work. But in a document that accompanies the MOU, you'll see summary that Matt prepared of the, I think, the products that we've received from the partnership during the past year that I think are really critically important. So with that, I'll turn to the chair to ask for a motion to approve the MOU as provided with Penn State.
All right. First, I guess we'll get a motion and a second just to get it on the table for any discussion. All right. Motion by Judge Marsico. Is there a second? All right. Second by DA Sunday. Are there any questions or any conversations or discussion about the MOU with Penn State? All right. Hearing none. I assume that motion in the second was to approve the MOU. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, the ayes have it.
Great, thank you. And related to that, because that includes the appointment of a new deputy director position, I'll just notify the commission that we will be posting that position. And then under the terms of the MOU, the chair and vice chair will lead the effort to interview any candidates and make a recommendation to the full commission. And then the commission will vote on the selection of that candidate. And because of that, whatever the time frame is, we certainly would do it no later than the September meeting. But if appropriate, we could always hold a special meeting via Zoom for purposes of approving a selection to move the process forward. So just wanted to put that on the record. The second MOU, and I know Professor Mystic's here and may want to excuse himself, but is for the the memorandum of understanding with Duquesne University School of Law. And I know Professor Rago is also on the call. And this is a renewal of the MOU we have in place. One of the changes is that we wanted to make sure it was a more institutional MOU, so it doesn't identify specific persons, but more responsibilities of the law school and of the commission.
All right. Is there a motion to approve the MOU with Duquesne University School of Law? Judge Daly, is there a second? All right, Judge Bernstein. Any discussion or any comments? Questions?
Chairman Stevens, it's Rago. I'll just abstain from the vote. I'll just tell you that in advance because of my relationship with Duquesne.
All right, that's terrific. All right, well, hearing no other comments or questions, I guess I'll make this easier. Are there any negative votes? All right, hearing none, the motion passes.
Great. And third MOU is with Villanova University School of Law. And this is a re-up of what we have in place. And central to the MOU is the Villanova Sentencing Workshop. Commission operates every spring in conjunction with the Villanova Law and with the Administrative Office of Courts.
All right, is there a motion to approve the memorandum of understanding between the Commission on Sentencing and Villanova University School of Law? All right, Attorney Marsico, is there a second? All right, Judge Marsico. Good to get you Marsico boys in here. All right. All right. Any discussion, any questions? Are there any negative votes? Hearing none, motion passes.
Great. The next issue is the data management plan. As some of you may recall, back in, I guess, 2015 or so, we had an attempted breach of one of our servers that led to disruption of access to our data. And as a mechanism to deal with that, the commission created a data management plan that articulated how we access data, how we protect data, how we disseminate data, and everything else. And it was a pretty comprehensive plan, but it was getting a little dated. So with the efforts of Brett and Christy and Matt, we went through and updated the data management plan. And as part of that, we also updated the release of information policy. Most of I'd say the basic framework remains the same, but we did try to update it, especially in terms of release of information policy, to streamline things, to promote the use of our website, that people could go to the website and obtain reports and other kind of information. We also wanted to standardize the data sets that we were making available so that every time we prepare a data set for the annual report, we also see that as a public data set, strip it of any kind of protected information, but it does have PII, personal identifier information, like individuals' names and stuff, things like that. But we think it's a best practice under our mandate to disseminate that we make this data set readily available. And by standardizing it, that we just create a data set and it's available, we can provide that free of charge. We can post it, but we can provide it free of charge to any people that request it. We think this is a more streamlined and efficient way to manage that, to give people data and not to get too worked up in the process of collecting money for it and other things like that when it's a dissemination of general information. The rest of the policy, though, adheres to what we've had in place, which is anytime there's protected information, those decisions have to be approved by the commission. If it's research using protected information, it requires an approval of an IRB at the institution the person's working with. And we build into that a request that whoever we're providing data to, it provides us with the findings report so the commission can use that information. We'll continue to have special reports available that can be approved by the executive director or by the commission, and we will continue to charge for those. So we have a menu of sort of cost menu that we have related to that. But otherwise, the data management plan is just a huge update of a really important document. And so I'd ask for approval of the updated plan and release of information policy.
All right. Is there a motion to approve the updated data management plan? Thank you, Senator Street. We appreciate it. Is there a second? All right. Seconded by DA Sunday. Any questions or discussion? All right. Are there any negative votes in approving the new data management plan? The update to the data management plan? All right. Hearing none, the motion passes.
Great, thank you. Two other items in this section. One is the COVID-19 response, just to say we continue operations as hybrid operations. And as I think has been discussed before, there's a lot of benefits in continuing this way in terms of flexibility for staff. But then if you just think about the meeting we're holding right now, there's greater involvement of the public because we stream this and have it available by Zoom webinar. But there's a benefit of having a physical location, meetings in public. So we will continue that, both staff practices and meeting practices as far as hybrid operations. On the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I just want to report out on some continuing efforts with Lincoln University to promote engagement there. We involved Professor Emmanuel Babatunde from Lincoln University in the Villanova sentencing workshop as a participant during one of the sessions. And then I met recently with Lincoln University faculty and students, sort of a luncheon meeting with probably 15 or 20 people. And I really think that we're moving towards developing some kind of partnership with Lincoln. There was a lot of interest in thinking about areas of engagement like internships and externships, sort of co-teaching classes, other kind of opportunities, and opportunities for students or faculty to be involved in discussions with the commission around policy development, things like that. So there's a transition right now of department heads. And so I had a discussion with the incoming department head and others at Lincoln. And I think we're going to continue this and look for ways to maybe formalize this during the coming academic year. So I think it's been I appreciate the support of the commission and particularly Judge Tucker in trying to get this underway. And I think we hopefully will be able to lock in some things in the near future. So with that, we'll move to the financial issues. Just sort of a heads up that as far as commission finances, we're in pretty good shape. We have a budget and appropriations coming up that haven't been completed yet, so we're hopeful about what comes out of that process. But we do have a number of action items regarding to the budget. The first is just modification of the current operating budget. We've been moving funds around to sort of close out the year. We have about a month left on the budget. And I think we're on track to end the year in sort of a surplus, which we'll put into reserves. But I'd like approval first for the modifications to the current operating budget.
Do you want to provide some information about the modifications, just generally?
And the details of the budget, I think, are included, and I can find the page. Page 50. Thank you. So you'll see that there are some areas where we have either gone over or under on page 50 and 51. If you look at the remaining balances, we need to, in effect, right-size those to come up with a zero balance. And I believe, and Jadine, if you could help me, I think after we make those corrections and take into account the encumbrances and anticipated costs for this year, what is the credit balance at the end of the year that we anticipate?
I think it'll be close to 320,000.
Thank you
for this appropriation.
And so that would be the amount that we would correct this to zero out and then place that 320,000 or whatever it is into reserve for use in next year's budget.
All right. Is there a motion to approve the modifications to the 2021-22 operating budget? All right, Judge Marsico, second. All right, Judge Daly. Any discussion or questions? Are there any negative votes? Hearing none, motion passes.
So the next action item, if I can get back to my action item page, is we went through the operating budget for the current year. Now we're looking ahead to the next fiscal year. And again, we're sort of speculating a little, but we hope to at least receive the appropriation we did this year. We also hope to receive the $400,000 appropriation from the second year, I guess, of JRI 2. And we are and we do have some balances like the $300,000 balance that we just talked about. So with that, we have developed an operating budget for the new year. What we tried to do with the budget, and this is outlined on page 52, is to identify the general expenses that we have across the board. So you'll see the budget is $3.2 million. But then the following page is the service purchase contract with Penn State. And if you recall, we run all of our salaries and fringe and a lot of our operating expenses, especially for staff and the University Park office, through Penn State. And then we get invoiced monthly for actual expenses. But at the start of the fiscal year, we identify what we think is the target amount for that contract with Penn State. And so of the 3.1 million, about 2.6 million is Penn State related expenses. And so in approving the operating budget for next year, it would be the general operating budget across the board, and then the specific specific service purchase contract with Penn State. And so I'm combining action items 8 and 9. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
But think how efficient that is.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
All right. So then is there a motion to approve the preliminary 2022-2023 operating budget, including the approval of a service purchase contract with Penn State in the amount of $2.591 million? All right. Judge Bernstein, seconded by. All right. Attorney Marsico, thank you. All right. Is there any discussion or any questions? All right. Any negative votes? Motion passes.
And then I believe Professor Mystic remains out of the room. And so the final action item is the service purchase contract with Professor Mystic for legal services in the amount of $40,000. So he's leaving the room. So in the amount of $10,000 quarterly.
Is there a motion to approve the service purchase contract with Professor Mystic for legal services in the amount of $40,000? All right, Judge Daly, seconded by Judge Marsico. All right, any discussion or questions? Any negative votes? Motion passes.
That's incredible. Thank you very much. So we got through a lot of action items. I'm going to turn now to Matt for the Deputy Director's report.
Thanks, Mark. A couple items just to update on the staffing. And I think that what Mark referenced was a document also that was prepared in pages 33 to 39 that outlines the roles and responsibilities of the various individuals that we work with who are non-PCS staff. So we have our visiting scholars, our graduate students, our postdoctoral scholars, some direct faculty engagement, and also some application of seed grants. And I'll return to that shortly. But under this model that we've been working with, we've currently engaged with 2 postdoctoral scholars through the MOU with Penn State University. As I noted in March, one of the postdoctoral scholars, Dr. Galvin, is leaving us after 3 years. She's done a tremendous amount of work. If you see on page 39 of the materials, some of the outputs, you'll see the number of reports and publications that she was involved with. And then we were recently informed that Dr. Claire Strange, our other postdoctoral scholar in racial and ethnic fairness, will also be leaving us this July, taking a job with Drexel University so still here in the Commonwealth. So that leaves 2 openings now for postdoctoral scholars. So we are working with the department at Penn State University to publicize and promote those applications. We had a preliminary interview this week with one of the candidates, and we'll see where that goes on that component. As far as visiting scholars, currently we're engaged with Dr. Reese Hester, who is part of the academic review panel and working with us on a number of initiatives related to the 8th edition guidelines. Will continue with us through this summer and the fall. We are also actively recruiting an additional visiting scholar for the fall. We've had some preliminary interviews and discussions, and hopefully we'll be able to fill that visiting scholar position soon when the executive director has a chance to meet with the candidate and speak about the arrangements and work that out with Penn State University. I'm also pleased to report that we have engaged yet again with the Masters of Public Policy program at Penn State University. Through their program, at the end of their first year, students obtain internships where they work at an agency for 10 weeks for 30 hours a week. So we welcomed last week Laura Regan, who is lives in the State College area, so is able to come to our office and work really closely. She's already been engaged on a number of things, including assisting us with some of the background research related to the presentation this morning on HR 111. So this is our 3rd summer now working with the new, I think this is the 3rd year that the MPP program's in existence. So this is our 3rd summer engaging with the students, and we're excited about that. As I mentioned, there's that memorandum that was prepared that details on pages 33 to 39, the specific activities that the different actors, from the visiting scholars to grad students, the postdoctoral scholars, what they engaged in. And as Mark noted, I just want to reinforce that the work that was presented this morning on HR 111 included a tremendous amount of work by both postdoctoral scholars who assisted with the conformity work, but also the attrition analysis, and weighed in heavily on the recidivism analysis as well. So their departures will be a big loss, and we hope to fill those positions with equally skilled, energetic, and entrepreneurial individuals coming up this fall. The final piece that I'd like to talk about is these partnerships, and Mark has already mentioned our work with Carnegie Mellon University. So I'm going to describe some of the work that the Carnegie Mellon students who engaged with this spring did related to prior records for recidivism. It's worth noting, slides up, that this partnership with Carnegie Mellon through this system synthesis information systems and public policy projects that they call system synthesis, where a team of students working with faculty advisors address or work on a really salient issue that we bring to them, and it's super data intensive. So I think it's just worth noting that this is a long-standing partnership that Mark and others have fostered going back over a decade, with a range of different projects they worked on, from parole guidelines, risk assessment, to thinking about redefining the prior record score. And again, this semester, really focusing on prior record score itself. And I think that Mark has framed this really well in previous conversations, where we're thinking about what is the purpose and goal of the prior record score. Is it for retribution, or is it a measure of risk? And what the Carnegie Mellon team did was to focus on this aspect of risk. If you thought about prior record score related to recidivism, how well does the current 7th edition guidelines do in predicting that? Also, how does the proposed 8th edition guidelines compare and work in that space? So we were fortunate to work with 6 incredibly talented students, and it's worth noting that they have very little exposure or understanding of the criminal justice system, but in a very short time, we're able to learn quite a bit about the 8th edition guidelines and how the guidelines function. But their real expertise is in handling and managing data and analyzing that and presenting it. So this is like I said, an incredibly talented team. And the faculty advisor on this was Professor Dan Nagan, who worked closely with the students and has engaged with the commission for many, many years on different research projects and has taken a strong interest in this idea about factors leading to recidivism. Some data that we've prepared independent of this that we shared with him is looking at recidivism rates for different cohorts of people born in different eras, thinking about the role, and something we'll highlight in a moment here, the role of age, again, these cohorts in the risk of recidivism, which ties directly to our current discussions about things like lapsing policies that we've talked about for prior records. So unfortunately, none of the students were able to attend the meeting today, so I'm just going to provide a very short overview of their research and their work in this space.
Yeah, and just on that point, all of these students just graduated and are fully employed. That's why they can't be here. So good for them.
So to take a look at this issue of prior record score and recidivism, they received Sentencing Commission data from January 1st, 2001 through December 31st, 2019. So they had over 1.2 observations and about 800,000 unique individuals. And I think something that we noted earlier in our discussion about our HR 111 study, their definition of recidivism is any reconviction of any crime that was committed within 3 years of being convicted for a prior criminal event. And they're able to follow everyone who's included in their sample for 3 years. So if there were people sentenced later that they couldn't track for 3 years, who had long confinement sentences, they would not be included in this analysis. So they've chosen just a slightly different, as Brett highlighted, definition or thinking about what their measure of recidivism. Again, just briefly, it's worth noting that the sample here is 25% Black, almost 2/3 white. We have this other category, which does include Latinx and others, but this is, again, back to what Mark noted about efforts to improve our data about race and ethnicity and these classifications that would allow us better insights into things like recidivism rates if we could clean that up and flesh that out in a better way of what's in other. Most individuals, 3/4 are over 25, but there is almost a quarter of the sample between 18 to 24 years old, and 3/4 of this population are males. So one of the distinctions between the proposed guidelines and the 7th edition guidelines is this idea of the true zero. So we see in the 7th edition guidelines, the score of 0 has roughly 53% of individuals in that category. As you move to the 8th edition, it's 45% roughly with a true 0, no prior record score. And then they're spread out, of course, in the 7th edition, right around 10%, 5% for 1, 2, 3, 4 prior record score, very little. They combined RFL and Reebok. Few, relatively small number of individuals who are in Reebok. Here we see about a quarter of the sample in low, a quarter of the sample in in medium, and then a very small proportion in high. Well, one of the things that I thought was interesting from their presentation was how does the 7th edition categories map to the 8th edition category? So we could see in the upper left cell as an example that this is representing when it's the 7th edition prior record score of 0, how do they map to the new prior record score of, in this case, 80% are in the new 0, and then about 20% in the low category. And we could see for the current PRS1, about 3/4 go into low and 20% into high. So we're blending them across our categories is really key point here. And then the final category for RFL Revoc, you could see they all fall into the prescribed high category.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Because last night when we were given just the sample proposal of the sentencing matrix, we looked at the prior record score with another and we numbered them. So I'm assuming low would be 1, medium would be 2, and then high is broken down between the 3 and the Revoc in what we were talking about. Does that make sense? We're looking at these now, we're seeing low, medium. We're talking about maybe number system.
That's
how
right.
that-
And
that
and one of the concerns we heard from people, from comments from the public, was that we were putting a lot of people in the medium category. And so the suggestion was, if you think about medium and high and finding some space in between the two, you might better distinguish sort of the high mediums and the low highs and put them in that category. And so, at least in what we've mapped out in that draft, it would do that. And I think we'd have to run the analysis, but I think it would smooth some of this in terms of the numbers. If you look back, Matt, could you just go back to if you'd see the mediums a little bit higher than the low, and I think if you created a category between medium and high, you'd probably have more of a trend in that lower direction by creating that. So we'd have to test that, but I think numerically it would fit a different profile.
All right, thank you.
Excellent question. Sorry, I didn't mention this was based on probably assumptions that were at the December meetings that we shared with the commission. Provided them with the mapping of the 2 prior record scores. This now illustrates the recidivism rates by these prior record score categories. And what's notable here is that the recidivism rate is about 19% statewide. Again, comparing that to Brett's presentation earlier, it's a little bit lower, but we're thinking about this as new convictions and we had a different population and sample. And as we know, a majority of the individuals in this sample has 0 prior record score. So it just a different population that we're looking and tracking them for 3 years. So what's notable for the 7th edition, and Mark referenced this earlier, was that the biggest increase is between 0 to some prior record. So we see this increase from about 15.5 at current prior record score of 0 up to 21%. And while it slightly increases from 1, 2, and 3 from 21% to 23%, it's a very small increase in recidivism. And then after that, we see that the prior record score is not predictive of higher rates of recidivism. So in its current format, maybe the prior record score in the 7th edition is not a great proxy for risk, especially on that higher end of 4 or 5 and get to RFL and READ. When the students looked at the 8th edition guidelines, we again see that big step up between no prior record to low from 15 to 20% to another increase to medium. And then the higher group is slightly different, goes down. But from the students' conclusions, which I'll get to shortly, that the 8th edition does a better job of measuring, think about it as a proxy for risk than the 7th edition, where again, you see that muddled view once we get the prior record score of 3 or 5, doesn't differentiate in this classical stair step approach.
Matt, can I ask
Sure.
a question about that? Couldn't that be though, because the RFL Revocs are locked up?
Correct.
So they're not going to, if you're only tracking for 3 years, they're not. And are we using arrest or conviction for recidivism?
This is conviction.
Okay. All right.
I think that's a great point and something that jumps ahead a little bit, which is one of their findings also, no, this is great, related to prior record score, risk, and age. And so if you are locked up for a long time, you obviously become older, and the older you are, age is really correlated with risk. So you may have a big prior record score, but you may be older. So it's balancing those 2 components of what your criminal career is like, and maybe it has kind of diminished when you have people who receive longer sentences in this sample because they had a higher prior record score. All right, this one's a little more challenging, and I'll just try to summarize it, which is it's showing the differentiation of the prior record score recidivism rates for whites and blacks. So whites are the purple color, blue color, and blacks are the off yellow color. And so focusing on whites, we see on the 7th edition, we see this stair step up again to the 3rd PRS category. And then it's quite muddled from there. For blacks, we see that increase from 0 to 1 in the recidivism rates, and then it doesn't do as good of a job differentiating. So looking at the 8th edition guideline, not only does the 8th edition do better in prior record score predicting risk overall, it seems to do a better job also for whites and blacks. We see that stair step 0 to low, and then an increase in low to medium. Even if it's small, at least it's in the direction we would think, but a little bit cleaner for whites, at least looking at this correlation between risk.
Question. The prior record scores in those editions, they include in the calculation of them, they include arrest records or just conviction records or both? How are they?
So these would be based off of juvenile adjudications and adult.
Thank you.
So this is getting to the point that I just made a little bit about the differences in recidivism rates. I'm sorry, this is the proportion of individuals who fit into those age categories. And if you look at 25 and over, we see that there's a higher proportion of whites who are older and blacks who are younger. So there's this confounding component about race and recidivism that may be independent of prior record score. So if you're 18 to 20, maybe you haven't accumulated a lot of prior record. There's more blacks in that grouping, maybe have a higher probability of recidivism just because of the age component. And I think from this morning's discussion, without overgeneralizing, one of the components that you could think about here, when we saw higher rates of recidivism for blacks, maybe it's the same function where there may be individuals who are younger who then have a higher probability of recidivating, as an example of one potential explanation of why we saw a differential between whites and blacks in recidivism rates. All right, one of their other,
I apologize. Quick question. When we're looking at the recidivism rates, are we looking at all crimes across the board, or is that tailored to specific crimes?
this was all crimes.
Okay, so that would include aggravated assaults and DUIs.
Correct.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
And I should note the report the students had was 80 pages, and they do investigate different types of offenses and different definitions of recidivism. But we'll put that report on our website for sure. And it does look at violent crimes and then what happens from a recidivism perspective in their report. The other piece that they added, and this is similar to material that we shared during the academic review panel, but this is looking at the duration of sentences for the intersection of OGS and PRS. And it's looking at when the cells are in orange, that means there's longer sentences for blacks. And when the cells are in blue, it means longer sentences for whites. So at lower PRS levels and high, and basically across the OGS spectrum there, as you go up, that blacks are receiving longer sentences, but whites receive longer sentences than blacks at the higher end. So out of their report came three general conclusions. And I think some of these are consistent with things that we've already talked about related to HR 111, but also talked about from a guideline perspective. Digging in a little bit more was one of their recommendations for why there seems to be differential rates in recidivism rates and why blacks have a higher prior record score. So we saw that again in the HR 111 report about higher rates of recidivism. The second recommendation is about developing real-time monitoring metrics to ensure that the guidelines are being equally applied across demographic categories and mitigate some non-structural factors causing this disparate impact. So Mark has already talked about obtaining additional data statewide from probation and supervision. The commission is working on developing some dashboards that will be available on our website to be looking at some of this information. So I think this is a great recommendation related to leveraging additional information from other agencies and partners across the Commonwealth, be it the Pennsylvania State Police, EOC, the parole board, et cetera, to really triangulate a lot of this data in a way that informs us about these differences, but allows us to look more specifically at prior record score and recidivism.
Yeah, I was going to add to number 3. So if you want to go through and then
Sure. Okay. And then they feel it's really important to consider an age element when thinking about prior records. One key component of that the commission is already considering are, of course, our lapsing policies, either through gap or decay for both juvenile adjudications and for adult convictions. And we heard a little bit over the dinner meeting last evening about different scenarios where these stale records for somebody who's older may not really be predictive of recidivism or may be discounted or not considered when thinking about sentence recommendations.
Sure. And we've had subsequent discussions with Professor Nagin from CMU, and I think he really emphasized that point, that one of the things that's not tested in this analysis, but I think there's a lot of merit, is really thinking about how we develop a lapsing policy. And his point was, as Matt said, if you think about higher recidivism for younger offenders, that also points to the other end of the scale where you have a lot of older offenders with these legacies of offenses that really don't get to issues of risk. And so, to some degree, if you put the two together, developing a prior record score that is sensitive to risk and to recidivism rates, coming up with a better scale for that, and then in effect using lapsing as a means of incorporating a correction for aging. And that's why in some states that have lapsing provisions, they sometimes rely on the decay one, where just over time you reduce the prior record score or eliminate offenses, because they've developed scales that are focused on risk, and then they're correcting by removing old things as people age, because age, past 35 or so, is a much better indicator or stronger indicator. So thinking about how you blend the two of those together in a policy is something worthwhile. I'm just going to put in one final plug. As Matt said, we've had a sort of this informal relationship with CMU for more than a decade, starting with Professor Al Bloomstein, now Professor Nagin, but also working with other faculty members. And they do incredible work at no cost. I mean, we are their customer, I guess. And we bring problems to them and give them data, and we work with them. But they have incredible students and faculty working on these projects, and you can see the results of this. And one thing that the commission may want to consider is thinking of ways to just improve or have a more formal relation with CMU. I'm not sure that we need a full MOU as we have with others, but maybe we do. But we should be looking at ways where we lock in, because this has been incredibly beneficial. And if faculty members change and other things change at CMU, it'd be a shame to lose this as a resource. So we should think about ways, and we'll have discussions with CMU, but I'll bring that back to the commission at some point, that figuring out an appropriate way to formalize this kind of engagement with them would be great. Thanks, Matt.
And I'll just end on one component that I think came up during the public hearings that was consistent with this, which is I presented some results just briefly on the sentences by OGS and PRS, the differential black and white for the 7th edition. And because we don't know how judges and prosecutors will use the new guidelines, we can't really model the sentences in the 8th edition. So the students thought about working in that space, but that's why we're only looking at the 7th edition. It's very challenging to think, how will these be utilized in practice regarding conformity rates and the sentence? We know the recommendation, but we're not sure what the actual sentence is imposed. So that's something, as we move forward, the commission staff consider what the implications of even the new proposals that Mark shared with you last evening related to the prior record score and the OGS, that we just have to be cautious in thinking about what we can and can't do without making too many assumptions that may not match with what happens in reality. So thank you for the time on the CMU.
All right. Any questions for Matt about any of the material presented? All right. Thank you very much. I'm going to shift a couple of things around here on the agenda. Mark and Ryan need to get to a CLE that they are they are involved with. So we're going to move Ryan up to next on the agenda, and then Mark will follow with the policy support discussion, and then we'll circle back to Christy and to Brett to finish up those sections, if that works.
Thank you, Chair.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Considering that we have to depart, I'll be brief and maybe more brief than I usually am. So I think what you can see on the screen here is a takeaway. And just because I won't speak in any great detail, we have in the notebook pages 65 to 69 some more details about education and outreach unit efforts. And then there's a lot more detail in the supplemental part of the commission materials that you can find. I think for me, maybe the three big takeaways for this slide and the work is just from an education outreach standpoint, how this unit is engaging from an education perspective, from a continuing legal education and continuing judicial education. And we've been working in a great way with a number of individuals across the Commonwealth to provide trainings on the guidelines, seminars, and other outreach. And so I think that's been a really great part of the expansion of this unit's work. And I know you've heard me in the past talk about that the commission is now a continuing legal education provider, and that's been really great. I think just in the first few months of the year, we've provided somewhere around 125 attorneys continuing legal education credits, and we've worked in a number of ways with AOPC on some recent judicial education, which included our Vice Chair, Judge Bernstein, and Judge Marsico. Just last week, I believe, we wrapped up a two-part session on evidence-based practices and informing PSIs. So just a quick takeaway there. Some other information that's helpful, and it's not necessarily on this slide because we're wrapping it up as we speak, is the 2021 reporting and verification effort. And so from the education outreach unit's perspective, we work a little bit on the front lines here with counties to report sentencing information. And I know that was a big discussion earlier, just around data. And so our unit has been working with a lot of counties and various departments to make sure that the information is being reported to the commission. And at the end of this week, we'll be handing that back off to Brett, and he can talk more about any analysis that they'll be doing to finalize 2021 sentencing information. And then the second to last thing I would say is just, communicating the commission's work. And that's picks up on a couple slides here, but just for us is making sure that we have our new website remaining updated. We release a monthly update. I'll note that June's monthly update was the 24th update that we've done. So it hit its 2-year anniversary. And I think that's a great way to communicate to counties and practitioners. And it also goes beyond just the counties and practitioners to those in academics and other places. I think it's actually a global update at this point. And then lastly, we have our YouTube channel. So we're continuing to build out videos there and having people subscribe and like, I guess, is the language that you use. I'm not up on all the terms yet, but I will continue to work on that. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, just from a staffing perspective, and Mark had noted it earlier, the Education Outreach Unit has welcomed its newest education and outreach specialist, Tiffany Smith. She joined in May, and she's hit the ground running. She's been engaged with other members of the unit in reviewing county intermediate punishment plans and helping us on the reporting and verification side. And Tiffany comes to the commission from Columbia County adult probation, where she worked for 18 years, and she has a lot of experience in generating and creating PSIs and guidelines. So I think I maybe went over brief, and I'll turn it back to the chair.
All right, thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Ryan? All right, thank you for your help, Ryan, and safe travels. And Mark, back over to you. We'll move to the policy support section with the action items there.
Great, thanks, Chairman. So we've spent the last day during the dinner meeting last night and the policy meeting this morning discussing some of the takeaways from the public hearings we had on sentencing guidelines. And we had 2 public hearings this week on the parole guidelines and recommitment ranges. So the action items are related to that. So the first one deals with, or the first 2, I'll couple them together, deal with the sentencing guidelines and recommitment ranges, or resentencing guidelines rather. And one of the things that we discussed in the policy meeting was to schedule a work session of commission members to start to or continue to review the comments we received and continue to refine our drafts. So we have published or posted on our website the documents that were reviewed by the policy committee and by during our dinner meeting last night. And that's just a sort of a next step in the process of trying to incorporate comments we heard into what was our working draft that we published in January. And there will be plenty more changes, but part of this is also the commission just sort of working through some of the details, testing some cases, coming up with examples, walking through them, see how they work with different iterations of the guidelines, and also making decisions about, how do we structure the prior record score? If we're going to make changes, what do they look like? So I just wanted to mention to members that Judge Bernstein and I had identified a handful of dates that may work for a policy meeting, a work session, just to sort of dig into all of this. And so I'm going to just put it on your radar, and then maybe we can ask Kathy to do a doodle poll to see if we have consensus around involvement. And if there's other dates, we can throw those in as well. But the dates we were looking at were the last week of June. So Tuesday, June 27th, anytime during the day, Thursday, June 29th, particularly in the morning hours, and then Friday, July 1st, anytime during the day. Now, I do want to mention I offered July 4th because my schedule seemed pretty open, but Judge Bernstein suggested we shouldn't have a meeting that day. So just in passing, I wanted to mention that. But so those are 3 dates that we're looking at. And I don't know, Judge, if you had any comments or suggestions, or if a doodle poll is the best way to try to find a date.
I think the doodle poll allows everybody to look at their calendars. I thought we looked at one other date. I thought July 5th was it?
Oh, you're right. Absolutely. July 5th. That's Tuesday,
Yeah.
July 5th.
And that was all days.
And that was all day.
And you had discussed, I believe, maybe a 3-hour block.
Yeah.
that You're proposing. And we never go over when we do stuff like that. So everybody might want to check the hour or 2 after that.
So we will put those 4 dates on the calendar and look for blocks of time. So either morning block, or a morning and or afternoon block on those days, and see what we have consensus. Since it would be a Zoom meeting, so we'd be doing it remotely. And as with any meeting, it would be a public meeting. We would be focused on it as a work session, but we'd have it available for public viewing. And because of that, we have to publish the meeting in advance. So we're thinking that week is, gives us time to publish in the Pennsylvania Bulletin and so forth. The other thing that I was going to mention, just as we're talking about scheduling, is that as the commission moves to post the deputy director position and moves towards the process, the chair and vice chair will be managing that process and conducting interviews and so forth. And as I said, the commission as a whole would have to vote on approving the next deputy director for that position. And we could certainly do that at September meeting, but if there would be
the ability to do that sooner, if a decision was made sooner and the chair and vice chair had a recommendation, we would have to do that during a public meeting. And so we would also have to publish that. So there may be some benefit of thinking of sometime during July or August of trying to target a date or dates for a brief meeting. It could be used for further discussion of the guidelines, so another work session, but it could also be a meeting where a vote could be taken publicly on any kind of hiring. So just sort of putting that on your agendas, and we'll come back after we have that poll out and make some decisions. So the first action item is any kind of action related to the sentencing guidelines or resentencing guidelines. And aside from scheduling the work session, which I don't think we need to vote on, there's just an action item in case members wanted to take any other action at this time.
So, I mean, do you need us to vote to
I don't-
have?
Yeah, I don't think we have to. I think, at the time we were saying if the commission was of the mind that they were ready to have staff start to draft preliminary guidelines, we would probably appreciate a motion on that. But if we're going to have a work session to continue to work on them, it might be premature and we can wait until September meeting. So action item 15 and 16 related to sentencing and resentencing guidelines, I think, unless there's any other action that the commission wants to take, we'll just schedule a work session.
I have a question. I'm assuming even though there's not an action item voted on, that you have some working draft on this as we go. So that I assume will continue.
We do. And the materials that we posted and distributed last night and to members, we'll continue to work on that. And if we get any heads up about, changing direction, we'll do that. But that will be the starting point, I think, of the work session.
And if during the work session, we make sufficient progress, perhaps in the July, August, optimistically quick meeting, we could then vote on this?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Great idea. Thank you. And as I said during the policy meeting, we're going to be looking to reach out to a number of important groups, trial judges, DAs, public defenders, the victims community and others, to have meetings just to sort of review where we are and get any kind of other insights or have discussions about that. And then also have some regional meetings so practitioners more generally and the public could be involved in just discussions. And they won't be public hearings, but there'll be more engagement to discuss what we're developing. So moving to the next item, and this may be an action item, and that relates to the state parole guidelines and the state recommitment ranges. So we published those guidelines. We have no guidelines in place right now, so these would be initial guidelines, and we see them as interim guidelines. We held 2 public hearings. There were some important issues raised, and we talked about those a little bit this morning in terms of concerns about race and incarceration, things like that, concerns about just using risk assessment at all, concerns about victim input and why it's not in the instrument, and there's a lot of issues related to confidentiality and the public nature of these documents. And so, it's before the commission now on how to act. I think staff would recommend that we move forward with submitting these to the General Assembly. And we could do that in, over the course of the next couple of months. So the General Assembly would have a 90-day review period. And if not rejected, these would both take effect January 1st of next year. And then we work with the parole board on implementing those things, figuring out data collection, and so forth. The other option is if the commission members wanted to consider any kind of changes to either of the documents, staff could work on those changes and bring it back to the September meeting, and the commission would have an opportunity to adopt then and to submit to the General Assembly, and we could still stay on the January 1st timeline. I think, and Professor Mystic can opine on this, but I think is in the past, if the commission was just making minor changes to what was published, there would be no need for subsequent publication and public hearings. If the commission was going to make substantial changes to what was published, then the commission would probably have to republish and have another round of public hearings. So
That's a correct description of the required procedure.
thank you, counsel. And so staff is recommending we move forward, but we'll open it to.
Yes.
Go ahead, Senator Street.
Question. Make sure I'm in the right place. So this is regarding the adoption of proposed state parole guidelines for submission to the General Assembly for review, correct?
That's correct, Senator.
The and those guidelines would include the use of a risk assessment tool.
Yes, it's required by statute that we use a validated risk assessment instrument. And so this is built on the LSIR, which has been validated for the DOC.
All right. Does the LSIR include arrest data? Is the risk assessment tool include prior arrest data, or is it just convictions and adjudications?
I'm going to turn to Brett or Matt. Do you recall? I thought it was convictions, but I'm not. I'm not. Yeah, we can check on that, Senator. I think it's convictions, but we've worked with them on a lot of matters, and I know they've been cautious in moving towards conviction, but I don't know for sure. So I can check with them to verify that.
Well, I mean, look, I that's fairly significant to me. We have a fairly, the judicial process is robust and imperfect, although imperfect. So the process for getting a conviction is significant and easily evaluatable. Arrests, on the other hand, involve levels of discretion in terms of just an officer pulling someone off the street to detain them for a decision to be made by a judicial official. That the arrest data is prior to a district attorney exercising any discretion. It's prior to a cop. It's prior to a judge exercising any discretion. As a matter of fact, there's no attorney who's exercised any discretion at all. And we know that for a whole host of reasons, Black and brown folks are statistically much more likely to be arrested and than they are convictions. And there are clearly disparities in convictions, but arrests are much more significant. And so understanding a little bit about the underlying data would be important to me, particularly at least at a threshold level, whether or not we're talking about arrests or convictions. And I will say I'm much more comfortable if this is based on convictions and adjudications rather than arrests.
Senator, just two comments. First, DA Sunday was just checking regarding the LSIR, and it uses conviction rather than arrest. But the second thing I did want to mention is the decisional instrument used by the board right now that we're trying to, I guess, have a public side to through these guidelines is using the LSIR, the information as part of that decision-making process. And we're sort of tracking that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think it included arrest, but I did. But
I appreciate you raising the issue.
I've been consistent
absolutely.
that is problematic for me, and to the extent that it doesn't. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Are there any other questions or discussion regarding the state parole guidelines, and in particular whether we ought to move forward with adopting them now, or if there's any direction for staff to dig in on any issues there? Anyone have any thoughts?
I just have a super quick question. I know some of the things that were raised in the public hearing were that people who are denied parole wanted more understanding. And I believe this tool is going to have some, it's going to be provided to them, and they're going to see the evaluation. So that will spell out and give more clarity to those individuals who are denied parole, the reasons, correct?
Yeah, judges. One of the things that I mentioned yesterday is having a discussion with the parole board regarding any concerns or qualifications around the release of the parole guideline form. But I think the suggestion was that the form, along with the green sheet, should be provided to an individual that was interviewed so that they have a better understanding of how the decisions were made. So I think we can do that if that's what the commission wishes to do in terms of providing that information. We'll have to check if there's any redacted fields, if there's any information there that there are concerns about, and we can bring that back to the commission, and we can work on those details about what is provided to individuals and in the aggregate form between now and December in terms of implementing. But I think our mandate is to disseminate information, and I think it makes sense to provide that as long as there's not any information that is of concern.
Thank you. And from my I think you have another. I was going to say, from my standpoint, I think that we are at a point where we could move forward with the action item.
Judge Marsico?
I guess my question is to Mark or to staff. Is there anything that came out of the last couple of days? I mean, it has been fairly recent that we just had those hearings. Is there anything that stood out for you or that you think needs further review before we go down that road?
Yeah, I think I tried to address some of the issues. I think there were, 2 or 3 categories of issues that I think are important and we have to continue to look at. The first was just the issue of risk. So the senator raised some issues. There were issues raised about risk assessment generally, but I think the statute requires it, and we're using an instrument that's validated, and those are the requirements. But I think we have to continue to work with the DOC and the board to move towards implementing Strong R, because Strong R not only addresses a broader population, does a better job of case management planning and other things like that, but I think it also addresses some of the points that Attorney Rowe raised with the PDAA regarding domestic violence and other specific categories of offending and risk related to that. And so, and also female offenders as a separate category. So I think all of those are important issues, and Strong R will do a better job of that, but it's just not in place yet. So I think that was an important factor. I think Mr. Rowe also raised a couple of concerns about just the point values and how we go about things like misconducts and categories of misconducts and other factors like that, time on parole or successful or unsuccessful supervision periods. And as I tried to explain, the guidelines that we developed are based on an analysis of the data we had, and the analysis looked at both decision-making, but also outcomes in terms of recidivism for people that were released. So it wasn't just a policy discussion with the board about what they listen for or look for. It was actually an analysis of data so that we could find factors that were available in the data that we could put into the guidelines that were statistically significant in determining whether it was a positive or negative feature. And so we were sort of driven by the data that was available and the definitions of that. And so I think in the past, a number of members have raised concerns about like differentiating out minor violations from major violations. And that's why there's a separate category for assaultive behavior or being convicted of a new offense as different weights or additional weights, or however you want to characterize that in the instrument. So I think those were important issues that were raised about the guidelines and how they operate. And I think we've addressed those issues as well as we can. I mentioned the victim issue before, that it would be great if we had data that we could use to build into the instrument, but we were not privy to that data, and we tried a lot to get that. And then with the understanding the policy importance and the legislative mandate to consider victim information, we tried to make sure we addressed it in the model as best we could. The other thing that was raised as a concern was racial impact. And one of the things that I mentioned this morning was on our website, from the development of the guidelines in 2020, we have published the work we did in trying to look at and trying to correct for and address racial impact, both in the instrument and how it operates, and then in what we expect would be the outcome. So I think we've done what we can with the information we have without guidelines being in place to address that issue and to try to provide that to the public. So that's available on our website, and it has been since 2020. With the recommitment ranges, I think that is an area of weakness. But one of the problems is with the recommitment ranges, we're basically codifying what the board is already doing. And there's very weak data that we can use to develop that. So until we have something in place and we can gather information and analyze it, it's really difficult to do anything meaningful with the recommitment ranges. And so that's why we were suggesting we put them in place, because they in effect provide a public side to what is happening internally by the board, try to capture information, and then use that to, I think, rebuild the recommitment ranges, because I think there's a lot of work that could be done there. But we're sort of in stasis because we don't have good data on it, and we don't even have recommitment ranges in place that we can collect data on it. So we'd hope to move forward and see both of these as interim guidelines or ranges to gather data, to work with the board to improve things, and then to work on getting the strong R in place so that we can update all of these in the future.
Mr. Chair,
Good.
if I could, I understand the use of this as an interim step for the parole guidelines, but for recommitment, I think that there are too many places where it is problematic, including the ranges that you already talked about. Moreover, I think codifying a process that has been largely derailed as non-functional sends the wrong message. You know, I know the Senate already adopted Senate Bill 913, Senator Bartolotta Williams bill, at a vote of 46-4. Now it's going to the House, which would dramatically change the process for recommitment now. And certainly legislation that hasn't been adopted by the House of Representatives isn't binding. But the fact that it passed the Senate 46-4 with only when at a time when we only had 46-3, we only now had 49 members with only 2 Democrats and 1 Republican voting against it, I think sends a message that there is a strong will in the General Assembly to re-examine how the Commonwealth deals with recommitments. And given that this is sort of recommending to the General Assembly that we ratify the current process, which at least the Senate has overwhelmingly rejected, and proposed a counter proposal, which I believe will be passed, because the amendment, the Senate Bill 913 includes the House Republican amendments to 1555 that were proposed in the prior session, and the House already passed 1555. The Senate hadn't adopted it. So procedurally, the House has already voted on the language in Senate Bill 913. And the House voted on the same language in House Bill 1555. We just need the House and the Senate, shockingly, to vote on the same bill, even though we've all voted on the same language. Right. So I think it would not make sense for us to proceed on recommitment guidelines when almost every member of the General Assembly has voted on a different process.
Thanks, Senator. And I appreciate separating out the two, because I think they are quite different. I thought the Senate and House bills dealt with probation resentencing, but maybe they also deal with parole recommitments. There
have been a number of nuances,
Yeah,
but
you're right.
the basic sentiment is the process that the General Assembly is advancing with is significantly different than the current one. And so I just think that we should hold off on recommitment, because I think that there will be, it's likely that before we recess for the summer, the House will adopt 913. And I think it's appropriate for staff to look at the implications of 913 and make recommendations in that regard. Again, the Senate having passed it 46-3 with only 1 Republican and 2 Democrats voting against it, and the House having already overwhelmingly adopted these provisions that were in House Bill 1555 as were recommended by House Republican Caucus.
Great. Thanks, Senator. And I think, as I said, and as we put in the publication, I think there's an opportunity to rebuild recommitment ranges, and it very much would be influenced by what comes out of the General Assembly on the probation side. So I appreciate there's a lot more work that could be done there, and I think it's the call of the commission about whether there's a benefit of putting these in place to gather data, or that we rebuild and move forward. And I think by separating out the two, I think it's easier for the commission to go vote on each on the merits or the next steps, and staff are happy to do whatever you decide.
So I just pulled up 913 because I hadn't read it in a while. I think it only applies to probation.
That may be that, like I said, the changes have happened, but I do think that it originally at one point applied to both. And I think that the provisions of it provides a guideline for where the thoughts process of the General Assembly is. I am not an author. I was a co-sponsor, but I do think that it's worth, because it'll probably be adopted, having staff examine that and then take that into consideration, because it does capture the thought process of the overwhelming majority of members of General Assembly from both sides of the aisle. And it's rare that we have this kind of consensus on any issue. And I will yield that it may not deal with the specifics of the recommitment ranges we're talking about here, but it does deal with similar concepts. And I think it speaks to the thought process of where most members are going. And it was your caucus, with all due respect, that originally drafted much of this language. We just amended that language into 913 because it came out of 1555.
All right. Well, I think maybe I can steer the conversation a little bit here. So, Mark, did you say that it wouldn't be a problem to delay further consideration, and particularly on the recommitment ranges, until September? God bless you. Until September.
Sure. I think recommitment we could put off to September, or we could continue working on it. I think the parole guidelines are about where they're going to be. I'm not sure we can do anything more meaningful to those. And if you split the two, I'd encourage the commission to move forward on the parole guidelines, and then staff can revisit the recommitment ranges, meet with the board, and if we can bring something back in September, fine, or else move it beyond that.
I think that might be helpful, because by then we'll have the benefit of whatever may or may not happen in the next month. As many of us know, the General Assembly, there's a lot that flies around in terms of bills and legislation here in the last month of the fiscal year. So we would then have the benefit of any movement on any of the probation related bills or any other bills that might impact these decisions. So that might make the most sense. Is there a consensus among the commission members to hold off on the state parole recommitment ranges until September?
Yes, sir.
All right. Seems from the gestures here that seems to be the will of the commission. We don't need a motion, right? Oh, is there
I'm not sure
online?
if you can see, but Senator Langerholt has his hand raised.
All right. Give us 1 second. We'll figure out how do we get Senator Langerholt on here.
Can you hear me?
Oh, Wayne, I think we have you.
I just want to make sure that the record reflects too. On 913, you're 100% right, Representative Stevens. That deals with comprehensive probation reform. I don't want anything on the record to indicate that what the intents of the Senate is with regard to some of this stuff. So you're absolutely correct. It is comprehensive probation reform only. I just want to make that clear. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate the input. Is there anyone, I only have the benefit of seeing the gestures of the people in the room. Is there anybody online who has any comments about holding off any additional decisions regarding the state parole recommitment ranges until September? All right. So if that's the case, then we'll, DA Sunday has something to add.
Thank you, Chair. I do. There's one point that I want to cover, and I don't mean to go back on this, but this is with regard to the proposed guidelines. I know that most of us were present yesterday for testimony.
But just so I can clarify, is this the state parole guidelines?
Yes.
Before you get there, do you have anything to add relative to the recommitment ranges and just delaying that discussion until September?
No.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to close that loop. So we'll hold off then on the recommitment range discussion until September. We'll have the benefit of whatever might happen in the General Assembly. Staff can continue taking a look at that other information. DA Sunday, the floor is yours on the state parole guidelines.
So with regard to the state parole guidelines, we had testimony yesterday from the PDAA Executive Director Greg Rowe that pertained to victims. And Mark, if you could, can you talk a little bit about so specifically what he testified to was that the deviation section contains prosecutor input and public safety. Victim input, victim safety, and witness safety should be included as well. Can you provide some commentary on that statement? That's something obviously that's extremely important for a lot of different reasons that was articulated during prior testimony. And so can you comment on victim input and how that relates to this?
Absolutely, and thanks for the opportunity. Starting with building these guidelines, as I said, we were building these based on analysis of data. So back during the many years that we were working with the board and with the department in trying to obtain data and then to use it to come up with these guidelines, one of the parties that we worked with was the OVA, the Office of Victim Advocate. And there were substantial concerns related to two aspects. The first was providing any victim data that could be used for analysis because there was a concern about just bridging a confidentiality that was there. So the commission tried, we had a lot of discussions looking for ways to obtain data, ways that could be redacted or used, and we could not reach a resolution on that we could even use the data. So we could not build it into the development of these guidelines. So then when we moved past that, then the question was, how do we incorporate that? Because we know it's a requirement, not only in our legislation, but under the Victim Bill of Rights, that they be involved in the process, that we take that into account. So we're required to take into account, but we couldn't build it into the model because we didn't have data. And so we had discussions again with OVA, with the board and with the department about information we could use to build into the guidelines, particularly in the interview process, that could capture that kind of information if it was available, but would not be I want to be careful about how would not be readily available for public dissemination. And there were concerns about retaliation against victims if on a guideline form that was public, there was any kind of indication that a victim was against parole and the person wasn't paroled, about there could be potential retaliation, other things like that. So we had to figure out a way to make sure that the board considered and took that into account, but without pointing out the victim. So the idea was to come up with several categories where, whether it was under prosecution / public safety input or judicial input, even indirectly, that there was an opportunity for that information to be captured and considered by the board during the interview without specifically identifying victim input as a reason for a decision. So we were trying to, thread the needle on this in terms of making sure it was part of the process, but we didn't do any harm as part of that process. And in our discussions at the time and subsequently, I think we did what we could that accommodated those areas. And especially with our discussion of making this form available to individuals that have been interviewed, I think it's even more critical that we be very careful about what we articulate in the form and how we.
I appreciate that, Mark. And one clarification and an additional question with regard to victim input then on parole, the proposed parole guidelines, then that victim input practically would go through the public safety prosecutor input. And so essentially how that would work is victims would communicate through the district attorneys and then the prosecutors would provide their input. Is that correct?
Yes, but not exclusively, because remember, this guideline form and the guideline process is sort of the public side of the equation. And we've been working very closely with the board of trying to make sure that these work sort of in sync with the decisional instrument used by the parole board internally. So we're trying to make sure we have sort of the same values, the same factors in play. But we recognize that the board internally has access to a lot more information, and they can articulate things within their decisional instrument that we can't on the outside. First, because they have access to the confidential information, and secondly, because their internal instrument is not available to the public. So they can dig deeper, and they should, and they do. And so we just wanted to make sure there was a placeholder, but keep in mind that even if the form, the guidelines would not appropriately weight or take that factor into account, the board has a responsibility to do that, and they can use an override or basically depart from our guidelines because of that reason if they want to. So they can articulate their own reason. They're not stuck by this. This is just, as with sentencing guidelines, it's just a starting point for a decision, but they have discretion to move in other directions, and they can give extra weight to something like that that's not otherwise captured because of how the limitations we have.
I appreciate that explanation, and it's important to understand that because I know that through my role, I see victims regularly who are terrified, in particular domestic violence victims who are terrified for the ultimate release. And I know there's data to support, in particular with domestic violence, that individuals that are paroled may commit horrific crimes against those individuals. And I just wanted to make sure that the work that the commission is doing, when viewed in totality with individuals that are going to be paroled, satisfies the requirements with the Victims' Bill of Rights. And so do you agree that that's the case?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. And we just have to strike the right balance in what we can say and how we say it to protect victims, but recognize that their input's really important. One final thing I will mention, I've had some email exchanges with the Office of Victim Advocate, and are looking for opportunities to meet with the victim advocate and others just to talk about, these specific issues, about not just parole guidelines and recommitment ranges, but also our sentencing guidelines. And so, as I mentioned this morning, one of the groups that we hope to meet with when we're talking about just guidelines generally is the victims community. And I think the OVA can be really helpful, and the advocate herself can be helpful in bringing the right people together and helping us to think through these. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess we're theoretically on action item 17, adoption of state parole guidelines and submission to the General Assembly. Is there a motion then to submit, to adopt the state parole guidelines and submit them to the General Assembly for review? All right, Judge Bernstein, seconded. Senator Street, is there any discussion or questions on the motion? I guess we've already had a lot of discussion and questions. All right, are there any negative votes? All right, motion passes. And then we will defer any action on the state parole recommitment ranges until the September meeting. And I think that completes all the action items, right?
It does. Thank you very much.
No problem. Safe travels. All right, and so now, Christy, I think we will jump to you, if that's okay, for the application and information technology section.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, everyone. Sorry I couldn't be there in person today for the meetings. I only have a few updates to report on for the applications and information technology unit. So I'll try to keep it brief since it's getting late. I'm sure everybody is ready for lunch. As Mark mentioned earlier, Craig Briggs started with our team just yesterday, filling the vacant senior software engineer position. Craig has 10 years of experience in software development and most recently worked for Avail Technologies in State College. While there, he worked on several software modernization projects, so he'll be playing a key part in our efforts to modernize SGS Web as part of the Next Gen project. We welcome him, and sorry, I just realized something. We welcome him and we're excited to have him on our team. In the March meeting, I discussed the RFP that we issued seeking assistance with the redesign of the SGS Web application as part of that Next Gen project. We received 16 proposals from vendors for the project. After reviewing the proposals and meeting with a few of the vendors, and we selected a company called JMT Technology Group. They were selected because they demonstrated the expertise in architecture and application design that we were seeking for the project. Their project proposal is included in the supplemental materials starting on page 95 if you're interested in more information. We received approval from the commission chair and the vice chair and executive director to execute a service purchase contract with them for the amount of $195,000. That service purchase contract is also included in the supplemental materials starting on page 159. They've already gotten started, so they started in May. They've structured the project in 3 major tasks, and the first is focused on reviewing requirements and doing some user experience discovery. To this end, they facilitated several workshops with commission staff to define goals and objectives for the next version of SGS Web, to learn more about the requirements related to the 8th edition guidelines and parole guidelines, and to identify existing user issues and pain points. They're currently working on analyzing and documenting their findings to conclude the first task. And then once they've completed that, they'll start working on creating the information and system architecture and the new UX design. While the project with JMT has been the primary focus the last few months, we do continue to support and develop the existing version of SGS Web. We're currently wrapping up enhancements to the database admin function, which will make the data management process easier and less error prone. These changes are tentatively scheduled to be deployed to production in July. Beyond SGS Web, the team continues to support the Redesign Commission website. We're currently working with the Research and Data Analysis Unit on the integration of new Power BI dashboards that they've developed in order to make those dashboards accessible to the public via the website. And I'll leave that to Brett to discuss in more detail during his update. And we've also been assisting with the JRI 2 compliance certification process that Ryan mentioned earlier. Lastly, I'll report that as of the end of April, 107,000 sentences had been submitted in SGS Web with 2021 dates of sentence, and 33,000 had been submitted for 2022. You can see the full report with those numbers in the supplemental materials starting on page 167. So I think that was really brief, and that's all I have for today. So unless there are any questions for me, I'll turn it back over to the chair.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Christy? All right. I know we've been going a long time. We have one more section to go. I just want to check to see if our court reporter is okay. You good? All right. All right. We'll plow through here and turn it over to Brett for the research and data analysis section of our agenda.
Thank you, Chair. And I will try to keep this brief. So to start, I just want to mention House Resolution 111. Staff has been doing a lot of work to put together this data and conduct the analysis. Matt and Miranda presented the first half of that analysis in March at the policy meeting. And today at the policy meeting, we went over the second half of that analysis, which was centered on recidivism and supervision analysis. We do have the deadline of June 30th to complete the final report for this resolution. And what I would ask from the commission today is to grant approval for us to move forward with the study, with the scope and the content that we've laid out over these past 2 policy meetings, and go ahead and move forward with putting that into a written report with much of the same content and scope.
All right, so we need a motion to authorize you to develop a report consistent with the two presentations that we received on House Resolution 111. That's safe to say? All right, is there a motion along those lines?
So move.
Was that Professor Rago?
No, it was Judge Tucker.
Oh, I'm sorry, Judge. All right. All right. Other end of the state. Sorry. All right. Moved by Judge Tucker, seconded by DA Sunday. Are there any negative votes? All right. Motion passes.
Thank you. So we will move forward with that report. And as I mentioned, the final report is due to the House of Representatives on June 30th. And we plan to provide a draft of that report ahead of time to the commission. Additionally, as Ryan and Christy both touched on, we've been working through the judge verification of sentences for 2021. This process serves a couple of purposes for us. Number one is to give the judges an opportunity just to verify the accuracy of the sentences as they've been reported to the commission. And then number two, this process serves as the kickoff of our annual report analysis and putting together the annual data set that we will then make available to the public. We'll be working through that process over these next couple of months during the summer, and hopefully, as Mark mentioned, we'll release a 2-year annual report, hopefully by the September commission meeting, and that will include then the release of those 2 years annual data sets. Finally, Mark touched on the data management plan, so I won't go into too much detail with that. But essentially, we've just sort of revamped some of our policies related to storage and sharing of our data and our release of information policies. Again, another project that we will be working on as we go through the next few months is an evaluation of the short sentence parole program. This program was a part of the JRI2 legislation, and the short sentence parole program went into effect in January of 2020. So we have a little over 2 years of data now to work with, and we'll be evaluating that program in terms of utilization, eligibility, and then any cost savings that might be associated with the program, which provides for those state inmates who have a sentence of 2 to 4 years. It provides them the opportunity to be released at their minimum sentence date without going through the typical parole process and interview. So it would provide for these eligible inmates presumptive parole release at 2 years. Finally, just mention that we continue to serve in our role as a data repository for the state and continue to field a number of data requests from researchers and from the General Assembly. And we continue to make reports available through our website, where we average roughly 100 users per month that are requesting our standard data reports. And with that, I think I will conclude the update for research and analysis.
All right. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Brett? All right. Terrific. Thank you, Brett. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Brett.
Appreciate all your work on House Resolution 111 as well. All right. I don't think, without Mark here, I'm flying blind. I think we're all set. I don't think there's anything left to cover other than I see a note here on the agenda regarding the national conference in Portland, Oregon on August 8th to the 10th. So contact staff if you're interested in attending there. Oh, good. All right. Matt's here. Terrific.
As Mark has noted, this summer, beginning, let me find the dates, August 8th through the 10th, there's a conference by the National Association of Sentencing Commissions, and their agenda is available on the website, which is www.thenascnac nsc.org. And this national conference is a convening of different sentencing commissions. We're talking about initiatives and proposals and projects and data and a possibility for collaboration. So I know that Mark has encouraged commission members to attend if they're able to. Currently, the commission has 2 presentations on the agenda, one by Brett Miller on parole guidelines, and the other is a collaboration between myself, Executive Director Bergstrom, Reese Hester, our visiting scholar, and Judge Tucker, related to the development of the 8th edition guidelines. I think the process itself of explaining the use of data and the way that we've gone about thinking about OGS and redoing PRS will be enlightening to other members who will be thinking about a similar process. And we're going to share our time during that presentation with a group from Washington State who also is doing a redesign of their guidelines. They're a little earlier in their process than we are. So I highly encourage folks to consider attending, and I believe that commission staff, maybe 8 or 9 of us, are hoping to attend. And just one last component of the meeting is there's an early bird registration that ends July 1st, but I'd be happy to share any additional information with members if requested.
All right, terrific. Anything else?
Just a reminder of the next commission meeting upcoming will be September 7th and 8th. And I believe there may have been some discussion about a location, but it's currently scheduled to be in State College and of course available in this hybrid format.
And we look forward to that meeting. It's always a good one. All right. Anything else? Anyone else have anything to add?
Just the agenda that he was talking about is online. It's also on page 74 of our packet.
Oh, for the national conference. Terrific. All right. Any other questions or business to be brought before the commission? All right, then we stand adjourned, and we'll look for that email about some dates coming up here shortly for some more work on these guidelines. Thanks, everybody. Safe travels.
Thanks, Chair.